We're going to be talking progressive overload right now. Specifically, what the fuck is it and how do you actually incorporate it into your training program so that you are building, quote unquote, a fuck ton of muscle? Because let's face it, that's what we all want. And I know the ladies out there listening to this will say, well, I don't want a fucking fuck ton of muscle. Well, that sounds shit. Well, actually, you do want a fuck ton of muscle because a fuck ton of muscle for you naturally is actually not that much muscle. You will just look shapely, sculpted, and sexy as fuck. So basically, you do want a fuck ton of muscle. Now, I'm not sure a fuck ton is a specific unit of measurement when it comes to muscle, but it's one I'm going to use. So hey ho, we are using the fuck ton, the metric fuck ton, shall we say. Now, progressive overload. You might have heard this in bodybuilding speak. You might have heard it on the internet. You might have heard it in forums. Do forums still fucking exist? I don't know. Anyway, if there are fucking forums out there, you may have heard it there. And you may have thought, well, I don't really know what that means. I know what the word progressive means. I know what the word overload means, but I don't know what that means in the context of a gym environment. And if that's the case, that's cool. That's cool. A lot of people don't know what it means. And even if you do know what it means, a lot of people don't actually know how to make it happen in a logical, structured fashion. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this episode of this show. Now, really, progressive overload is the most effective way of building muscle. There are other ways to do it, but it's the most effective, especially as a natural athlete. It's the one you're going to basically be focusing on more than anything else. Now, this is where you want to increase what we call mechanical tension on a muscle over a period of time. Now, what's mechanical tension? Well, if you just think about doing a bicep curl or something like that, when you've got a weight in your hand and you're trying to do a bicep curl, you're creating tension in that bicep. Effectively, the bicep is being pulled on the bone. That's the muscle is attached to a bone. When you've got a weight on the other end, basically you're creating tension and you're creating a force against that muscle attached to that bone. That's like mechanical tension on the muscle. And you want to increase that amount of tension over a period of time, logically and in a structured way, and in a progressive way, and that's going to be your progressive overload. Now, you've got like other forms of training, like getting a pump. So you hear Arnie talk about the pump being better than coming, or whatever the fucking thing is in that documentary, Pumping Iron. So yeah, I don't think it's as good as coming, but anyway, we're drifting off topic here drastically. Let's pull it right back in and talk more about training rather than pumping. Now, metabolic work, pump work, whatever you want to call it, is a way of building muscle, but it's much less of a contributing factor overall when you look at all of the other options available. So we're going to focus in on progressive overload. Now, there are 4 ways in which you can progressively overload the muscle. One is more sets per muscle group. So for example, when you look at your workout program, maybe you've got a lot of chest volume, glute volume. The amount of sets you do per muscle group is an indication of progressive overload. So for example, if in the first 4 weeks of your training program, you're doing 2 working sets for glutes, and in the second 4 weeks, you're doing 3, and in the final 4 weeks, you're doing 4, you have progressively overloaded that particular muscle group with more set volume. That's kind of a straightforward way of looking at it. The next thing you want to think about would be more reps at a chosen weight. So let's say that you bench press 60 kilos and you can do that for 8 reps. If you then work out and do that consistently, that same exercise, you keep repeating it, you keep working hard, maybe then do 9 reps, you do 10 reps, 11 reps, 12 reps, whatever it may be at 60 kilos. Okay, you've increased the amount of volume because you've increased the amount of reps at that particular weight. You could then also increase the actual weight itself at the same number of reps. So if you did 8 reps of 60, then you did 8 reps of 100, clearly that is more volume because you're shifting more weight for the same number of reps. The other thing you can do is a mixture of all of those different things. So therefore, they are your core principles of progressive overload. And what I'm going to talk to you about right at the end of the podcast is basically a practical way of making sure you get all of those into one training program. that's going to be a godsend, right? And that is a good reason for you to stick on and listen and bear with me as I talk through not a lot of other bollocks, but just some other useful information. But you really want the practical stuff, but that's at the end. Now, what you also want to look at is what is the basic principle of training volume. Now, training volume is, again, like how much work you're getting a particular muscle group or movement pattern, or however you want to look at it, is basically how much volume of training you're doing at any given point in time. Now, the traditional way of calculating this is sets times reps times weight, and that will give you a specific amount of weight that you are lifting a number of times over a number of sets. So if you're doing 4 sets of 10 times 100, you're doing 4 times 10 times 100. That gives you your training volume, maybe for that particular exercise. Now, that's what you're effectively trying to increase. So whether you increase the sets, the weight, the reps, or all three, is you're effectively increasing training volume over time. Now, really, if you don't want to get you can get super fancy, and you can start to measure training volume by workouts. You can get fancy by doing it by movement patterns. I suggest if you're just kind of starting out this whole thing, just pick the core lifts. So let's say you've got squats, bench press, deadlifts, shoulder press in your program. Maybe if you're a lady, you've got some like hip thrusts and stuff like that. I would focus in on those to start with. Once you've got this process down pat, start to incorporate some other more sort of complicated ways of calculating your training volume. But just what you want to say, okay, I want to make sure that my bench press is always moving forward. I want to make sure that my hip thrusts are always moving forward, so that I know that my key specific body parts that I want to improve, the training volume is increasing for those. Now, what I would suggest you think about is training volume for progressive overload over a 12-week period. And what you want to do is say, go for 12 weeks, deload. And then when you go into the next 12 weeks, after a week's worth of deloading, is that your starting point should be that much higher than when you started that first 12 weeks. And then you're going to keep on repeating that process time after time after time. Now, obviously, you are going to get to a point where is the law of diminishing returns, in the sense that you can't actually just keep on getting stronger and stronger and stronger. Otherwise, we'd be walking around with everyone being fucking Superman, because you can bench press fucking 3 tons because you just keep consistently adding weight to the bar. That's not possible. And that's where, you'll get to an advanced stage and you start to incorporate maybe some more other training techniques. And maybe you realize that you're at the point where you're spending a year trying to get the tiniest amount of muscle growth. It is really kind of that point where you get to that law of diminishing returns. But I'd say for the first 4 years of training, you really don't need to worry about that sort of shit. You're going to make enough progress to make it worth your while and not get too demotivated and start to have to look at other sort of crazy other things to help progress. Now, your first point of call really is to get stronger, especially if you're doing this naturally. Get stronger in the basic lifts. Ideally, repeat them consistently over the course of a week. But again, when you get to rep ranges, as we've spoken before about in previous podcasts, really anything kind of works. But because you want to try and get stronger as well as build muscle, maybe for those compound lifts, tend to go into the lower rep ranges. Maybe for isolation work, which is not necessarily going to contribute a huge amount to raw strength, although it obviously does, is that you maybe want to go into the slightly higher rep ranges so that you can maintain quality form while still pushing yourself harder. But again, that's just a guide. It is not gospel. Kind of do what the fuck you want. But you just want to say, okay, whatever rep range that I've picked, I want to make sure that that weight is tough. I want to make sure that you want to get to the point where, let's say for example, you're picking a 4 to 6 rep range. You're doing some bench presses. First of all, you want to say, well, I want to pick a weight where I am lifting the weight I can lift, and 4 reps is pretty damn tough. Doesn't necessarily have to be to complete failure, but 4 reps is tough. Then what you're looking for is each and every time you come back to do bench presses, you want to do 1 more rep. You want to, as they say, beat the logbook. Whatever you logged in last week's workout, that's the goal. It's not the goal to increase the weight by 50 million kilos. It's just to do 1 more rep. Because guess what? One more rep at that weight is progressive overload. So if you did 4 reps of 80 kilos, if you can do 5 reps the next week, then awesome, you've progressively overloaded. You're still creeping ever closer. Now it might take you weeks to get one more rep, but it eventually will happen over time, and that will be progressive overload. Now I suggest when you pick this rep range, you've got this, say, 4 to 6 rep range. Week after week, you're trying to get one more rep. Then you get to the point where you say, right, I can do 6 reps, and I can do 6 reps for 2 sets in a row. That's the point I would say, increase the weight on the bar. Then what you've done there is you increase progressive overload by repetitions. Then you've increased progressive overload by weight as well. But you've done it in a structured fashion where you can actually cope with that weight, under load, with good form, and you've progressed it logically. Then you think about, okay, think about set volume. So like I said before, maybe break your 12 weeks into 3-4 week chunks. So week 1 to 4, you're saying, okay, well, I'm going to do 2 working sets, and I'm going to do 2 working sets hard. Within those 2 working sets, I'm going to try and do 1 more repetition. If I get to the top of the rep range, I'm going to increase the weight, but essentially you're doing 2 working sets. Then you're going to move into the second 4-week block, and you're going to do 3 sets. Same principles apply, but you're going to do 3 sets. And then the last training block, you're going to do 4 sets. And again, you've increased your overall training volume, not just by focusing on weight, not just by focusing on reps, but by focusing on sets as well. So there is a practical structure for you to increase progressive overload over time in a structured fashion. So let's go back through that again. So if you want to increase progressive overload over time in a structured fashion, take your training and break it into a 12-week block. Within that 12 weeks, break it down into 3 4-week sections. In week 1, you might want to do 2 working sets. In the middle section, you do 3 working sets. And in the final section, you do 4 working sets, increasing your set volume in a structured fashion over time. When it comes to reps, pick a rep range. Pick a weight that you can achieve the bottom end of that rep range consistently with good form, but it is actually tough. Then aim for 1 more repetition every time you get into that particular workout and that particular exercise. Okay, you won't be able to increase 1 repetition every single week, but consistently you will. That will hit progressive overload. When you get to the top end of that rep range, consistently for 2 sets on the trot, then increase the weight. And do the increase in weight by the smallest increment possible. Don't go and whack fucking 20 kilos on the bar. Whack on like 2.5. Again, you're just trying to do it progressively. It's inch by inch, kilo by kilo. It's not about trying to make huge progresses from one week to the next. So I hope you found that useful, and I hope that gave you some practical tips, gave you an understanding of progressive overload and how you can actually logically incorporate it into your training program in a structured fashion. If it did, I want to hear from you. I want to hear from you on Instagram. Slide into my DMs, drop me a message and say, hey Simon, listen to your podcast on progressive overload. It was fucking awesome. Loved it. So do that at iron_paradise_fitness. And if you want some more information about how to lose weight, lose fat, build muscle, and information on my online coaching program, then I suggest you go read a bunch of my articles on ironparadisefitness.com, and you'll also find a cool information page with testimonials and all sorts of shit about what I do from an online coaching perspective. Because let's face it, if you want me to manage your progressive overload for you, set you up with a badass training program that's personalized, customized for you, along with nutrition recommendations that get you a lean, mean, badass body in double quick time, then I suggest you check out the online coaching page as well. But for now, thanks so much for listening. Keep living the lean life, and I'll see you for the next episode of the show.